Good afternoon. As you know, my name is A6. Some people call me Antonio. What we're going over today, I had a long conversation with some of my teammates on my jiu-jitsu team. We were having a conversation about touchy subjects. So I basically asked, why do you guys think certain things shouldn't be brought up? And they basically said, well, in society, it's pretty much a taboo. And so I started asking questions like, well, why is it a taboo? Well, because, you know, if you get into a certain topic, people could get upset, people could feel a certain way, and people could genuinely just not want to talk to you anymore. It could be very uncomfortable. So I started to say, well, if things are brought up a certain way to me, and if they're talked about in a certain fashion, I believe that a lot of different things that could be seen as taboo can be addressed. So one of those things, one of those ways that you can address those things, I pretty much put together a step-by-step strategy in which you can talk about, or how to talk about it rather. So the first thing I usually like to frame a question with is, boom, let me ask you a question. So anybody who knows me knows when I say, let me ask you a question, it's either going to be a deep, not easy to answer conversation or question, or it's going to be something that's not something people like to talk about a lot. So I'll say, hey, let me ask you a question. So they'll say, okay, well, what is it? So I'll ask my question, but I'll be careful not to attack the person. You gotta be very careful with that one because people can be touchy about what they believe. So as a result, you have to understand this person might not necessarily think like you do, or they might not have all the facts to think like you do. So as a result, it's very important for you to be able to ask the question in a certain way where it doesn't attack the person right offhand. So phrases you got to watch out for is, you know, accusationary, like, what is it you think about your people doing this to us? Like, that's just too much. Like, you've already entered the conversation abrasively. So you got to be careful about things like that. Again, make sure you just say, okay, well, what do you think about what happened in Virginia yesterday night or yesterday during the day? Very simple question to ask, okay? All right, so you listen and genuinely absorb the knowledge. Hear what the person is saying, understand that they're trying to make a point, and listen. Let it process. Understand it, okay? Make sure you don't listen to respond, listen to listen. So that means when they say something, let it process again, because that is a step right there that's very crucial. And then when you respond, you have to make sure that you don't respond and disregard everything they just said, because that's very irritating. Address any questions you have while addressing what was said. Okay, so if they just said, let's say for instance, well, he walked in the door and he couldn't close the door because it was broken. You wouldn't just say, yeah, but the guy over there told me that this guy does that a lot. No, 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 no. What you want to say is, no. Well, you're saying the door was broken. Well, why is it that when I came in, and I came in right after him, and I shut the door and it was working? And another question, and you ask your question to tie it in. So that's the way you address that. So also, one I struggle with here, I mentioned, don't cut the person off. Now, if we get really passionate about conversations, a lot of times we want to just jump in and get whatever it is stuck in our head out before we forget. That can happen to me a lot. A lot of people I know that happens to also. So be careful of that one, because that can come off like you're being a jerk. And the last thing you want to do in a touchy situation or subject, rather, you want to be careful not to come off as a jerk. Think of it like a room filled with gasoline. That small spark can just ignite the whole entire thing. So be very careful with that, especially if you don't know the person very well. Very important. Okay, so what I usually do is we'll just repeat the process. It can be the back and forth between, you can go here, right here, to if it's another question, or you can just go here all the way to here. Those steps there, and just repeat those as necessary until there's a clear understanding about both points. And then when you want to tie it in and finish it up, you can just finish up the conversation with interesting. Now, with that said, for that, as much as that goes, that can really go for if the person says something that you agree with, or if they say something that doesn't really make much sense, or if you just don't want to talk about it anymore because then, you know, you just don't want to have that conversation with the person anymore. Easy way to finish it off. And then you can tie into something you guys maybe agree upon. So one thing I always put, make sure you come into any debate or question or disagreement you're having with facts. You got to make sure you come with facts, because the thing of the nature is, if somebody doesn't know something, then it is your job to educate them about that specific topic if they're interested in talking about it. Of course, if they're not interested in talking about it, they would have told you up front, yeah, I don't really want to get into that too much. You know, I don't want to get into that at all, which is fine. That's fair. If they told you that up front, you got to acknowledge and respect that and just move on to something else. But make sure you come into any question that you have or discussion you have with as much facts as possible. And if the person's presenting facts to you, it's your job to make sure that you absorb those facts. So, you know, if you don't believe something, you can just say, what did you just say that was? Punch it in your phone. You can look it up then, or you can look it up later. Whatever makes sense to you. So that's pretty much what we have so far today. I know there's a lot of stuff going on right now in Virginia. These conversations have to be had. They have to be had because they can't be ignored. The more we ignore things like this, the more they continue to happen. So we have to make sure as everybody comes together, we can have these discussions without anybody flying off the handle and maybe possibly come up with solutions and then take action. But it has to first be addressed. All right? Till next time, I'll be here next week with some other things to talk about. Take it easy.